An ordinary man dressed in a simple polo shirt and comfortable trousers settles into his business class seat 3A. He looks like he could be anyone: a teacher on vacation, a retiree visiting family. But to the senior flight attendant, he looked like a problem, a mistake, someone who didn't belong. In a decision fueled by silent, ugly judgment, she would demand he move to the very back of the aircraft. She expected him to comply, perhaps argue meekly, and then retreat. She never expected him to reach into his bag and produce a small blue booklet that would not only end her career, but would send shockwaves through the entire airline industry. This isn't just a story about a flight. It's about the moment a quiet man's dignity collided with blatant prejudice and the world was forced to watch. The air inside the cabin of Transglobal Airways Flight 88, non-stop from New York's JFK to Geneva, hummed with the quiet energy of expensive travel. The business class section was an oasis of muted greys and polished chrome, where the scent of pre-departure champagne mingled with the soft leather of the lie-flat seats. Passengers moved with a practiced ease, stowing away designer carry-ons and settling in with the Financial Times or the latest best-selling thriller. Into this serene tableau stepped Dr. Samuel Obasi. He was a man of medium height and build, his face etched with the fine lines of someone who thought and listened more than he spoke. He was dressed not in a tailored suit, but in comfortable navy blue trousers and a simple dark green polo shirt. His carry-on was a worn but sturdy leather briefcase, its corners softened by years of use. He held his boarding pass in one hand, his eyes scanning the seat numbers with a calm deliberation. 3A, his assigned seat, a window seat in the third row. As he paused to let a passenger ahead of him settle, he caught the eye of the purser, the senior flight attendant in charge of the cabin. Her name tag read Cynthia Vance. She was a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in the airline's sharp uniform, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe, flawless chignon. Her smile, however, did not quite reach her eyes. It was a professional veneer, a mask of hospitality that she donned and doffed with practiced efficiency. When her gaze fell upon Dr. Obasi, the mask flickered. It was a micro-expression, lasting less than a second, but it was there. A subtle tightening around her mouth, a fractional narrowing of her eyes. It was a look that bypassed the man and assessed his category. Black man dressed down in business class. The conclusion she drew was instantaneous and unspoken error. Dr. Obasi had seen that look 1,000 times in 100 different countries. It was the universal language of quiet prejudice, a silent questioning of his presence, his legitimacy, his worth. He had learned long ago not to let it break his composure. He offered a polite, almost imperceptible nod in her direction and proceeded to his seat. He placed his briefcase in the overhead bin and settled into the plush comfort of seat 3A. He was tired. The preceding days in New York had been a whirlwind of preliminary meetings and intense negotiations at the United Nations headquarters. This flight to Geneva was the critical next step, a summit on impending global food shortages that required his direct oversight. As a special envoy for the UN World Food Programme, his work wasn't about luxury. It was about logistics, diplomacy, and the lives of millions. The business class seat wasn't a perk. It was a necessity, ensuring he arrived rested and ready for the grueling 72 hours that awaited him. Cynthia Vance moved through the cabin with an air of proprietary control. She offered warm, personal greetings to the passengers in rows 1 and 2. "Mr. Sterling, so good to have you with us again. Can I get you a glass of Bollinger before we depart?" she asked a portly man in a pinstripe suit, her voice dripping with deference. "Make it a double, Cynthia. You know me, the man." Reginald Sterling boomed back, flashing a gold-ringed hand. When she reached row 3, her tone shifted. To the woman across the aisle from Dr. Obasi, she was polite but clipped. To Dr. Obasi, she offered nothing. No greeting, no offer of a drink. She simply moved past him, her attention already focused further down the cabin. It was another small cut, a deliberate omission designed to signal that he was in her world, invisible. Dr. Obasi closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep, calming breath. He would not let this woman's small-mindedness disturb his focus. He had bigger things to worry about than the petty slights of a flight attendant. He thought of the reports in his briefcase, the stark figures detailing crop failures in sub-Saharan Africa and broken supply chains in Southeast Asia. He thought of the children whose faces haunted his dreams. That was real. This woman's silent judgment was just noise. A younger flight attendant, a girl named Amelia with wide, kind eyes, came by a few moments later. "Sir," she asked softly, "can I get you something to drink before takeoff? We have champagne orange juice or water." "Orange juice would be lovely." "Thank you," Dr. Obasi said, smiling at her. The warmth in his smile was genuine, and Amelia returned it. She seemed to notice the tension her superior had left in her wake. As she poured his juice, her eyes flickered towards Cynthia, who was now at the front of the cabin, laughing at something Mr. Sterling had said. Amelia's expression was nervous, as if she were walking on eggshells. The boarding process was nearly complete. The final passengers were finding their seats, and the cabin doors were being prepared for closure. Dr. Obasi sipped his juice, looking out the small window at the bustling activity on the tarmac of JFK. He was already thinking ahead, mentally rehearsing the opening statement he would deliver in Geneva. It was then that he saw Cynthia Vance approaching him again. She wasn't carrying a tray of drinks or a warm towel. She was walking with a rigid posture, a look of grim determination on her face. Her eyes were fixed solely on him, and in them he saw the cold light of manufactured authority. The noise, it seemed, was about to get louder. Cynthia Vance stopped beside seat 3A, her body angled in a way that created an unspoken barrier. She didn't lean in conspiratorially or speak in a low tone. She spoke at a normal, clear volume, ensuring the nearby passengers, including Mr. Sterling in 2C, could hear every word. "Sir," she began, her voice devoid of any warmth, "I'm afraid there seems to be a problem with your seating assignment." Dr. Obasi looked up at her, his expression neutral. "A problem. My boarding pass indicates this is my seat." He held it up slightly for her to see. The bold print was unequivocal. "Obey CS. Seat 3A. Cynthia gave the pass a cursory, dismissive glance. "Yes, I see that. However, there appears to have been a duplication in our system. The manifest shows this seat is also assigned to another passenger. It's an unfortunate computer glitch, but we'll have to sort it out." Dr. Obasi knew this was a lie. He had been one of the first to board the business class cabin. There was no other passenger standing in the aisle, waiting for seat 3A. It was a fabrication, a flimsy pretext for what he suspected was coming next. He decided to play along to see just how far she would take this charade. "I see," he said calmly. "Well, I'm sure it can be rectified. Is the other passenger here?" He looked around the nearly full cabin pointedly. Cynthia's jaw tightened. He wasn't meant to question her. He was meant to be flustered, apologetic, and immediately compliant. "They are being accommodated elsewhere for the moment. The point is, sir, that this seat is technically unconfirmed for you. Due to this operational issue, I'm going to have to ask you to move." Her use of the word technically was the key. It was a weasel word meant to give her flimsy claim a veneer of officialdom. Move where exactly Dr. Abbasi asked, his voice still level. This was the moment. Cynthia gestured vaguely towards the rear of the aircraft with a flick of her head. "We have an available seat for you in the back of the plane. It's in the rear cabin. I will need you to gather your belongings and follow me now. We are preparing for departure." The back of the plane. She hadn't even offered premium economy. She was sending him a paying business class passenger to the very last rows of economy. The insult was so brazen, so transparently motivated by his appearance, that it was almost breathtaking. A few passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. Reginald Sterling in 2C had paused his conversation and was now watching the exchange with a smirk of entitled amusement. He seemed to be enjoying the show. The young flight attendant Amelia, who was collecting glasses near the galley, looked horrified. Her eyes met Dr. Abbasi's for a fleeting second, filled with an apology she dared not speak. Dr. Abbasi took a slow, deliberate sip of his orange juice, setting the glass down gently on the small table. He looked directly into Cynthia's cold blue eyes. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping slightly but gaining an edge of steel. "Let me be perfectly clear. I have a valid ticket and a valid boarding pass for this specific seat which I paid for. There is no other passenger claiming this seat. There is no duplication. You are asking me to vacate my rightfully purchased seat and move to a lesser cabin based on a falsehood." Cynthia's face hardened. The mask of professionalism was gone, replaced by unconcealed irritation. Her authority had been challenged directly. "Sir, I am the purser on this flight. My job is to manage the cabin. This is an operational requirement. If you refuse to comply with a crew member's instructions, I will be forced to call the captain, and we can have you removed from the flight for non-compliance." It was the nuclear option, the ultimate threat. The cabin grew quieter. The low hum of the engine seemed to fade as the human drama took center stage. This was no longer a minor disagreement. It was a public confrontation. Dr. Abbasi felt a profound sense of weariness wash over him, but it was immediately followed by a surge of resolve. He had endured prejudice his entire life, from the subtle condescension of academic peers in his youth to the overt hostility of border guards, who couldn't believe a black man carried a doctoral degree. He had always met it with quiet dignity and intellectual superiority. But this was different. This was a direct public attempt to humiliate him, to strip him of his place, to render him insignificant. And it was happening while he was on a mission of critical global importance. His patience had found its limit. "You are correct," Dr. Abbasi said, his voice resonating with a new profound authority that made Cynthia pause. "You are the purser, and the captain is indeed the ultimate authority on this aircraft. I think it would be an excellent idea for you to call him. Please do so immediately." He did not raise his voice. He did not gesticulate. He simply sat there, a picture of immovable calm, and turned her threat back on her. He leaned back in his seat, folded his hands in his lap, and waited. The power dynamic had shifted in an instant. Cynthia had expected fear and retreat. She was met with serene defiance. Flustered, she stammered for a second. "I am warning you, sir." "And I am inviting you," Dr. Abbasi countered smoothly. "Please get the captain. I have a feeling he will be very interested in the full context of this operational requirement." Cornered and furious, Cynthia spun on her heel and marched toward the cockpit, her face a mask of thunder. Reginald Sterling looked less amused now, a flicker of unease crossing his face. This was escalating beyond a bit of casual entertainment. Dr. Obasi felt the eyes of the other passengers on him. He ignored them. He reached up, retrieved his worn leather briefcase from the overhead bin, and placed it on his lap. He unlatched the 2 brass clasps, the soft click-click sounding unnaturally loud in the tense silence. He did not reach for his ticket or his passport. He reached for something else, something he rarely used outside of official border crossings and high-level government meetings. A small blue booklet embossed with the gold seal of the United Nations. Cynthia returned no captain in tow yet, but with a renewed sense of purpose. She had likely decided to give him one last chance to bow to her will before involving her superiors. "This is your final opportunity to comply, sir," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "Get your things and move to the back, or you will be leaving this plane in handcuffs." Dr. Obasi slowly lifted his gaze from his briefcase to her face. He said nothing. Instead, he took the blue booklet and opened it. He held it up for her to see. On the left side was his photograph. On the right, in bold letters, were the words "Laissez-passer," the official diplomatic passport of the United Nations. Below his name, Dr. Samuel Obasi was his title special envoy, Under-Secretary General rank. He then calmly flipped to the next page, which contained a clear multilingual statement. The bearer of this passport is on official United Nations business and is to be granted all immunities and privileges accorded to senior diplomats under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Obstruction of the bearer may constitute a violation of international treaty. Cynthia Vance's eyes scanned the words. The color drained from her face. Her jaw went slack, and a look of pure, unadulterated horror dawned in her eyes. The angry, imperious purser vanished, replaced by a woman who suddenly understood that she had not just insulted a passenger. She had not just broken company policy. She had potentially interfered with a senior international diplomat on a sanctioned mission, and in doing so had just ignited a fire that could incinerate her entire life. The silence that followed the reveal of the diplomatic passport was heavier and more profound than before. It was a vacuum sucking the air and bravado out of the cabin. Cynthia Vance stood frozen, her eyes locked on the gold crest of the United Nations. The booklet in Dr. Obasi's hand seemed to radiate a quiet power that eclipsed her own authority completely. Her entire world, built on the rigid hierarchy of the airline and her senior position within it, had just been turned upside down by a man in a polo shirt. Her mind raced, desperately trying to process the information. Under-Secretary General, Special Envoy, Vienna Convention. These were not words one encountered during a dispute over seating. These were words from a different realm, a world of embassies and international law, a world where her purser's uniform meant absolutely nothing. The man she had tried to banish to the back of the plane was in the grand scheme of things infinitely more powerful than she was. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She stammered the words, catching in her throat. The imperious tone was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy whisper of panic. Before she could formulate a coherent sentence, a tall, authoritative figure emerged from the cockpit. Captain Robert Miller had a salt-and-pepper mustache and the calm, steady eyes of a man who had seen everything from engine failures over the Atlantic to medical emergencies at 35,000 feet. He had clearly been summoned. "Cynthia, what is the situation here?" he asked, his voice a low, commanding rumble. His eyes moved from his panicked purser to the composed passenger in seat 3A. Cynthia flinched as if she'd been struck. "Captain, there was a seating discrepancy." Captain Miller's gaze fell upon the open diplomatic passport still resting in Dr. Oberse's hand. He was a veteran pilot who had flown routes to global capitals for over 30 years. He recognized the document instantly. His expression shifted from inquiry to grave concern. He ignored Cynthia and addressed Dr. Oberse directly, his tone immediately respectful. "Sir, I am Captain Miller." "Is there a problem?" Dr. Oberse finally closed the blue booklet and placed it on the seat beside him. He looked at the captain, acknowledging a fellow professional. "Captain Miller, your purser was under the impression that my seat was not mine. She insisted I move to the rear of the aircraft to accommodate an operational issue. He delivered the facts without embellishment or anger, letting their weight speak for itself." Captain Miller's eyes, cold as chips of ice, swung back to Cynthia. "Cynthia, on what grounds did you make this demand?" "The manifest. It looked like a duplication. I was trying to resolve it before." Her voice trailed off as the lie crumbled under the captain's direct stare. He knew, and she knew he knew, that there was no such duplication. The passenger manifest was electronic and flawless. Was there another passenger at the gate making a claim for seat 3A? The captain pressed his voice dangerously quiet. "No, but did you check with the gate agent about this supposed duplication before taking action?" "I was about to." "Did you offer to reseat the passenger in another business class seat, as per standard procedure for any legitimate issue?" A deathly silence was her only answer. The protocol was clear in the rare event of a legitimate double booking. The first priority was to find a comparable. Sending a passenger from a premium cabin to economy was a last resort reserved for massive flight reconfigurations and always accompanied by significant compensation and profuse apologies. It was not something done on a whim. Captain Miller understood everything in that moment. He saw the unassuming black man, the obsequious fawning over Mr. Sterling in the row ahead, and his purser's rigid confrontational stance. He connected the dots with devastating clarity. This wasn't an operational issue. This was prejudice, pure and simple. And it had been enacted upon a VIP of the highest order. He turned back to Dr. Oberse, his face a mask of sincere apology. "Dr. Oberse," he said, having read the name in the passport, "on behalf of Trans Global Airways, and myself personally, I offer you my most profound and sincere apologies. This is completely unacceptable. It is not our policy, it is not our standard, and it will be dealt with in the strongest possible terms. Please accept your seat with our compliments. We are honored to have you aboard. Reginald Sterling." The businessman in 2C was now trying to look intensely interested in the safety card in his seat pocket. The smirk was long gone, replaced by the discomfort of a man who realizes he has been a willing audience to a catastrophic error in judgment. Dr. Oberse gave a small, dignified nod. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your intervention." He did not smile. The insult had been public, and the principle was what mattered. "For the sake of your schedule, I have no desire to delay this flight further. However, I must insist that this incident be formally and officially documented. I will be filing a full report with both the airline's Corporate Governance Office and the United Nations Transportation Section upon my arrival in Geneva. The mention of the UN Transportation Section sent another visible shudder through Cynthia. That was the body that negotiated travel contracts worth tens of millions of dollars with airlines. They did not take kindly to their diplomats being harassed. "Of course," Sir Captain Miller said immediately. "I will file a captain's report myself, detailing the entire event from the moment I was called. You have my word." He then turned to Cynthia, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying the force of a thunderclap. "Cynthia, go to the rear galley. Amelia will handle the business class cabin for the duration of the flight. Do not speak to another passenger. We will talk when we land." It was the ultimate professional humiliation. Stripped of her duties, banished to the back of the plane, like the passenger she had tried to displace, she was no longer the purser. She was just a liability. White as a sheet, she turned without another word and performed the walk of shame down the aisle, past the staring eyes of the passengers she had been so keen to impress. Every step seemed to be a nail in the coffin of her career. As the cabin door was finally sealed and the plane began its slow taxi to the runway, Amelia, the younger flight attendant, approached Dr. Obasi's seat. Her hands were trembling slightly. "Dr. Obasi," she said softly, her voice filled with genuine remorse. "I am so sorry for what happened. It was wrong, Doctor." Obasi looked at her, and for the first time since the incident began, a flicker of warmth returned to his eyes. He saw not an employee of the airline, but a young woman with a decent heart who had been trapped in an impossible situation. "It was not your fault, Amelia," he said kindly. "Thank you." His grace seemed to give her courage. "Is there anything at all I can get for you? A different drink? A blanket? Anything?" "I am quite all right," he replied. "But thank you for asking." As the powerful engines of the jet roared to life and the plane hurtled down the runway, lifting into the night sky, a fragile peace settled over the cabin. But it was not the serene, privileged peace of before. It was a tense, changed atmosphere. Dr. Obasi looked out the window at the shrinking lights of New York, his mind already shifting back to the crisis in global agriculture. He had won the confrontation, but the victory felt hollow. The incident was a stark, ugly reminder that no matter your title, your education, or the importance of your mission, there were still those who would judge you by nothing more than the color of your skin. And the consequences of that judgment were only just beginning to unfold. The 7-hour flight to Geneva passed in a state of suspended animation. Amelia tended to the business class cabin with a quiet, almost reverential efficiency, avoiding Dr. Obasi's seat unless he specifically requested something, as if not wanting to intrude further. Cynthia Vance was not seen again. She remained in the rear of the aircraft, a ghost in a uniform. Her authority gone, her future hanging by a thread. Captain Miller remained in the cockpit, but his presence was felt throughout the plane. He was now managing not just a flight, but a serious diplomatic incident. Upon landing at a misty Geneva airport, the usual rush to disembark was subtly altered. An official-looking woman in a sharp Trans-Global Airways ground uniform was waiting at the jet bridge just outside the aircraft door. She looked anxious. Captain Miller was there to meet her, and they spoke in hushed, urgent tones. As Dr. Obasi gathered his briefcase, the captain approached him one last time. "Dr. Obasi, our station manager, Ms. Dominique Laurent, is waiting for you. She is here to personally assist you in any way you require and to reiterate our deepest apologies." "Thank you, Captain," Dr. Obasi said, shaking the pilot's offered hand. He respected Miller's professionalism in handling the fallout. When he stepped off the plane, Ms. Laurent immediately came forward. Dr. Obasi. I am Dominique Laurent. I am so terribly sorry for the experience you had on our flight. It is inexcusable. We have arranged for a private car to take you to your hotel or your meeting wherever you need to go. Your luggage will be collected and brought to you directly. Her apology was swift and comprehensive. The airline was already in damage control mode. The car will be fine, thank you. Dr. Obasi replied, his tone polite but firm. But my primary concern now is ensuring the official report is logged. Of course, sir. It has already been escalated to our corporate headquarters in Chicago. I assure you, it is being taken with the utmost seriousness. Dr. Obasi nodded, took the card she offered him, and was whisked away by a waiting driver. He did not look back. Later that afternoon, after checking into his hotel and reviewing his notes for the following day's summit, Dr. Obasi sat down at his desk. He bypassed the airline's generic customer feedback portal. He opened his secure laptop and composed 2 emails. The first was to the UN Office of the Legal Counsel and the Transportation Section. It was concise, factual, and devastating in its clarity. He detailed the flight number, his seat, and the purser's name, Cynthia Vance. He recounted her fabricated story of a duplication. Her demand that he move to the rear of the aircraft, her threat to have him removed from the flight, and his eventual need to present his diplomatic credentials to halt the harassment. He attached a scan of his boarding pass. He did not use emotional language. He simply presented the sequence of events. He concluded, "This incident represents not only a profound personal insult, but a potential obstruction of an official on a critical UN mission. I request that the Transportation Section review its relationship with Trans-Global Airways in light of this event, which suggests a severe deficiency in staff training regarding non-discrimination protocols and the treatment of internationally protected persons." The second email was to the personal office of the CEO of Trans-Global Airways, a man named Richard Branson. No, that wasn't right. That was Virgin. He recalled the CEO was named Edward Morrison. He'd met him once at a Davos forum. The email was similarly worded, a direct transmission of facts from a high-level client. He concluded this one differently. While Captain Miller's response was professional and appreciated the initial actions of Purser Vance, were a shocking failure of your company's duty of care. It is my sincere hope that you will use this unfortunate incident as an opportunity to enact meaningful systemic change within your organization, to ensure no passenger, regardless of their station or appearance, is subjected to such humiliating and discriminatory treatment. He pressed send on both emails. The dominoes had been pushed. Thousands of miles away in Chicago, those emails landed like bombs. The message from the UN triggered immediate alarms. The airline's multi-million-dollar contract to be a preferred carrier for UN personnel was suddenly at risk. The direct email to CEO Edward Morrison bypassed the entire corporate bureaucracy and landed on the desk of a man who understood that a scandal involving a high-ranking diplomat was poison. An immediate high-priority internal investigation was launched. It was codenamed Case 88GV-A for the flight number and destination. The Legal Department, Human Resources, and the In-Flight Services Division were all mobilized. Captain Miller's report was the first piece of evidence. It was damning. He corroborated Dr. Obasi's account precisely and added his own professional opinion. Purser Vance's actions were not based on any operational reality. In my 30 years of flying, I have never witnessed a senior crew member behave with such poor judgment and overt prejudice. Her attempt to displace a passenger from a premium cabin to economy without cause, and her subsequent escalation, put the airline in a position of extreme liability. Next, they pulled Cynthia Vance's complete service record. For 25 years, it was mostly exemplary, filled with commendations for her meticulous service and cool handling of minor emergencies. But as investigators dug deeper into the digital archives, a pattern began to emerge. Over the last 5 years, there had been 6 informal passenger complaints filed against her. All had been minor logged by customer service and dismissed with a form letter apology and a voucher. But the investigators noticed something chilling. All 6 complaints had been filed by passengers who were persons of color. One was from a black doctor who claimed she had repeatedly ignored his call button. Another was from a Latino businessman who felt she had spoken to him in a condescending manner. A third was from an Asian family who complained she had chastised their children harshly while ignoring the behavior of other children in the cabin. Individually, they were minor incidents easily dismissed as misunderstandings. But when viewed together in the shadow of the incident with Dr. Obasi, they formed a clear, undeniable mosaic of discriminatory behavior. Cynthia Vance wasn't just having a bad day on Flight 88. She was a practitioner of a subtle, insidious brand of prejudice, one she had gotten away with for years, until she chose the wrong person. The final piece of evidence came from Amelia. Pulled into a video conference with 2 grim-faced executives from HR, the young flight attendant nervously recounted what she had seen. She spoke of Cynthia's fawning over Mr. Sterling, her cold dismissal of Dr. Obasi, and the palpable tension she created. "I knew it was wrong," Amelia said, her voice trembling. She looked at him like he didn't belong there. I was afraid to say anything. She's the purser. I'm sorry." The executives reassured her she had done nothing wrong. Her testimony was crucial. It provided the human context that the reports lacked. Within 48 hours, the investigation was complete. The evidence was overwhelming, incontrovertible. Edward Morrison, the CEO, convened an emergency board meeting. The verdict was unanimous. This could not be swept under the rug. They had to act, and act decisively. For Cynthia Vance, the landing in Geneva was the beginning of a nightmare. The debriefing with Captain Miller was short and brutal. He did not yell. He simply stated the facts and informed her she was suspended from all duties pending a full investigation, and that she was to fly back to New York as a passenger in economy the next day. The flight back was a 9-hour exercise in humiliation. She who had ruled the premium cabins for decades was now crammed into a middle seat between a snoring tourist and a restless toddler. The flight attendants, her former colleagues, treated her with a cold professional distance. They knew. The gossip had already spread through the airline's internal network, like wildfire. She arrived home to her pristine apartment on the Upper West Side, a home paid for by a quarter-century of dedicated service, and waited. For 2 days there was silence. She tried to convince herself it could be salvaged. A suspension, perhaps. A formal reprimand. Mandatory retraining. She would apologize, grovel if she had to. She could not lose this job. It wasn't just a job. It was her identity. She was Cynthia Vance Purser, for Trans-Global, a citizen of the sky. Without it, who was she? The call came on a Friday afternoon. It was from the Vice President of In-Flight Services, a man she had known for 15 years. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Cynthia," he said with no preamble. "Following the investigation into the incident on Flight 88, we have made a decision. Based on your violation of company policy, your unacceptable treatment of a passenger, and the severe reputational and financial risk. Your actions have exposed this company to your employment with Trans-Global Airways is terminated effective immediately. The words hit her with the force of a physical impact. Terminated, not suspended, not reprimanded. Fired. But 25 years, she whispered the words, catching in her throat. My record, your record has been reviewed in its entirety. Cynthia. The VP said, his voice like stone. This incident has brought a previously unseen pattern of behavior to light. The decision is final. A severance package as required by law will be couriered to you. Your flight benefits are cancelled. Do not attempt to enter company property. We wish you well in your future endeavors. The line went dead. Cynthia stood in her silent apartment, the phone still pressed to her ear. It was over. Her career, her life as she knew it, had been ended in a 2-minute phone call. A profound, hollow emptiness opened up inside her. But the true nightmare was just beginning. The story, too big and too juicy to contain, was leaked. A mid-level employee in the airline's PR department, horrified by the initial reports and disgusted by what he saw as institutional racism, leaked the anonymized incident report to an online aviation journalist. The headline blared across the internet the next morning, Trans-Global Purser fired after attempting to move UN diplomat to back of plane. The story went viral. It was picked up by major news outlets, first in the US, then globally. Though the airline and the UN refused to name the diplomat to protect his privacy, Cynthia's name was not afforded the same protection. A disgruntled former colleague, bitter over a past slight, confirmed her identity to a tabloid. Suddenly, Cynthia Vance was infamous. Her face, sourced from an old company newsletter, was plastered everywhere. She became the subject of furious talk shows, scathing opinion columns, and a torrent of online vitriol. She was branded Purser Prejudice, a living symbol of entitled bigotry. Her social media profiles were inundated with hateful messages. Friends she had known for years stopped answering her calls. Her sister called, crying, asking how she could have done something so awful. She couldn't leave her apartment. The one time she tried to go to the grocery store, she was recognized. A woman pointed at her and shouted, "There's that racist flight attendant." Cynthia fled back to the safety of her home, her heart pounding with shame and fear. The isolation was crushing. Alone in her apartment with the silence broken only by the sound of news alerts on her phone, she was forced to confront the truth. For years she had seen herself as a guardian of standards, a protector of the right kind of people who belonged in her cabin. She had made countless small judgments, given preferential treatment to those who looked and acted like her, and given the cold shoulder to those who didn't. She had never considered it racism. She had called it maintaining ambiance or intuition. Now, stripped of her uniform and her authority, she saw her actions through the world's eyes. She saw the ugly prejudice that had driven her. The man in seat 3A. She hadn't seen a man. She had seen a stereotype, a problem to be managed. She had been so sure of her own judgment, her own superiority, that she had never once stopped to consider that he might be more important, more dignified, more human than her narrow worldview allowed. The consequences were absolute. Her career was over. No major airline would ever hire her again. Her reputation was in ruins. Her personal life had evaporated. She had lost everything. Not because of a single mistake, but because a single incident had revealed the truth of 1,000 smaller ones. It was a complete and total unraveling, a fall from a great height, brought about not by a diplomat's power, but by the weight of her own choices. The hard reality settled in her life was broken, and she had no one to blame but herself. Weeks turned into a month. In Geneva, Dr. Samuel Obasi successfully chaired the summit. His impassioned speeches and deft diplomacy helped forge a new international accord on preemptive aid for regions facing crop failure. He worked tirelessly the incident on the flight, serving not as a distraction, but as a quiet, burning fuel. The fight for a hungry child's right to eat and the fight for a man's right to sit in a seat he paid for were, he knew, rooted in the same fundamental principle, the non-negotiable value of human dignity. He never spoke publicly about what happened on Flight 88. When reporters, having deduced his identity through flight schedules and diplomatic rosters, contacted his office, the official response from the UN was brief. Dr. Obasi is focused entirely on his diplomatic mission. The matter with the airline has been resolved at an institutional level. The resolution was significant. Trans-Global Airways, under immense pressure, did more than just fire Cynthia Vance. CEO Edward Morrison, taking Dr. Obasi's emailed advice to heart, saw the crisis as a brutal but necessary catalyst for change. He publicly announced a 5-point plan. First, a public, unreserved apology to the unnamed diplomat and to all customers who had ever felt marginalized on their flights. Second, the implementation of a new mandatory annual implicit bias and de-escalation training program for all 50,000 employees, designed and run by a leading civil rights consultancy. Third, a complete overhaul of the customer complaint system with a new AI-powered analytical tool designed to detect patterns of misconduct against protected groups. Fourth, the creation of a new executive-level position, a Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer tasked with ensuring equity at every level of the company. Finally, as a gesture of goodwill, the airline made a multi-million-dollar donation to the World Food Programme, Dr. Obasi's own organization. It was a corporate reckoning, swift and expensive, born from the actions of one employee on one flight. Dr. Obasi took no personal satisfaction in Cynthia Vance's ruin. He had seen her file photo in the news and felt a deep sense of melancholy. He saw not a monster, but a person so trapped in her own biases that she had self-destructed, causing immense collateral damage in the process. His goal had never been revenge. His goal, as stated to Captain Miller, was to uphold a principle. The formal reports, the emails, the official channels. They were not tools of vengeance, but instruments of accountability. He believed that systems, whether they governed nations or the cabins of airplanes, only improved when their failures were exposed to the light. In New York, Cynthia Vance finally sold her apartment. The infamy attached to her name made her continued life there untenable, and the legal fees from a failed wrongful termination lawsuit had drained her savings. She moved to a small anonymous town in the Midwest, taking a job as a clerk at a local library, a place of quiet and books as far from the world of international travel and public scrutiny as she could get. The work was humbling. She spent her days stamping books and helping people from all walks of life, people she would have never encountered in the rarefied air of business class. For the first time, she began to see individuals, not categories. She saw the tired single mother looking for a children's book, the elderly man seeking a newspaper from his home country, the teenager struggling with a research paper. In the silence of the library stacks, she began a long, painful process of introspection. The fall had been brutal, but from the wreckage, a different person had to emerge. The cost of her education in humility had been everything she once valued. The story of Flight 88 eventually faded from the headlines, becoming another cautionary tale in the vast archives of the internet. But for the people involved, it was a defining moment. For Dr. Abasi, it was a reaffirmation of his life's work. For Captain Miller and Amelia, it was a stark lesson in leadership and moral courage. For Trans Global Airways, it was a scar on their reputation that led to meaningful if forced reform. And for Cynthia Vance, it was the end of one life and the forced beginning of another. A permanent reminder that a person's true character is revealed not in how they treat their superiors, but in how they treat those they believe to be beneath them. 3 years is both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. For Cynthia Vance, it had been a lifetime. The glamorous purser who once jetted between continents was a ghost, a shed skin she barely remembered. Now she was just Cynthia, a quiet woman with prematurely graying hair who wore cardigans instead of tailored uniforms and found a strange solace in the scent of old paper and bookbinding glue. The library in Oak Creek, Iowa was her sanctuary and her penance. Her days were measured in the gentle thump of the date stamp and the hushed whispers of patrons. She had learned the geography of this small world with the same precision she had once applied to aircraft cabins. She knew which patrons preferred large print mysteries, which students needed access to the online academic journals for their term papers, and which toddlers would beeline for the colorful picture books on the lowest shelves. She had become a fixture, a calm and helpful presence that no one would ever connect to the infamous purser prejudice from the viral news cycle years ago. The anonymity was a balm on a wound that would never fully heal. One crisp autumn afternoon, the library doors opened to admit a family that was new to Oak Creek. They were a husband and wife with 2 young children, a boy of about 10 and a girl a few years younger. Their skin was the deep brown of sun-baked earth, their features unfamiliar to the largely homogeneous population of the town. They spoke to each other in a language that flowed with a soft melodic cadence, but their English was halting, spoken with the careful deliberation of recent learners. They were refugees sponsored by a local church having fled a nation torn apart by civil war and famine. A nation whose plight Dr. Samuel Obasi had likely debated in a sterile UN conference room. Cynthia watched them from behind the circulation desk. They moved with a hesitant uncertainty, their eyes wide as they took in the rows upon rows of books. The father approached the desk holding a worn piece of paper. "Please," he said, his voice soft. "We look for book for learn English for children." The old Cynthia, the purser from Flight 88, might have given a curt, impatient sigh. She might have pointed vaguely towards a section and turned away, her mind already on more important tasks. But that woman was gone. This, Cynthia smiled warmly. "Of course. We have some wonderful resources. Let me show you." She came out from behind the desk, her movements slow and welcoming. As she began leading the family towards the language learning section, a gruff voice cut through the library's quiet. "Can't they keep it down? This is a library, not a marketplace." The voice belonged to Mr. Henderson, a retired farmer and one of the library's crankiest regulars. He was sitting at a nearby table, peering over his newspaper with a look of undisguised disapproval. His gaze was fixed on the refugee family. The father froze his shoulders, slumping as he understood the man's hostile tone, if not all his words. He instinctively pulled his children closer. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about a life spent navigating suspicion and prejudice. In that moment, Cynthia felt a sickening jolt of déjà vu. It was the same energy, the same toxic judgment she had once wielded at 35,000 feet. She saw herself in Mr. Henderson's pinched face, She saw Dr. Abasi in the father's dignified, wounded silence. The air crackled with the same tension, a confrontation waiting to happen in the quietest place in town. Her heart began to pound. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to placate Mr. Henderson, to hurry the family along, to make the problem disappear. It would be easier, safer. But as she looked at the fearful eyes of the little girl hiding behind her father's legs, she realized that easier was the path that had led to her ruin. She took a deep breath, the air filling her lungs with a courage she didn't know she possessed. She turned to face her regular patron, positioning herself slightly between him and the family, creating a protective shield. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice soft but firm, carrying a strange new authority. "They're new to our town, and they're just trying to find their way. I'm helping them. I'm sure we can all share this space with a little bit of grace." The word hung in the air. Grace. A quality she had so spectacularly lacked. Mr. Henderson grumbled. Well, they should learn to be quiet like everyone else. "And they will," Cynthia replied, her voice unwavering. "Learning takes time. That's why they're here. At the library." She gave him a look that was not confrontational, but was utterly non-negotiable. It was a look that said, "This ends here." Defeated by her calm resolve, Mr. Henderson retreated behind his newspaper with a disgruntled huff. The moment had passed. Cynthia turned back to the family, her smile returning, this time tinged with a deep-earned empathy. "Please don't mind him," she said softly to the father. "Welcome to Oak Creek. Let's find you those books." For the next 20 minutes, she didn't just point them to a section. She sat with them on the floor of the children's area. She showed the parents simple picture dictionaries and phonics books. She found a dual-language copy of a classic fairy tale and read the first page aloud in slow, clear English, pointing to the words as she went. She saw the little girl's fear melt away, replaced by curiosity. She saw the father's tense shoulders relax as he realized he had found not an obstacle, but an ally. When they left, armed with a stack of books and new library cards, the father paused at the door and looked back at her. He placed a hand over his heart and gave a slight bow. "Thank you," he said. The two words were filled with a gratitude so profound it made Cynthia's throat tighten. She simply nodded, unable to speak. As she watched them walk out into the afternoon sun, she felt a quiet shift deep within her. There was no applause. There was no corporate commendation. Her act of kindness had been witnessed by no one of consequence. And yet it felt more significant than any perfect service she had ever delivered in a first-class cabin. She had spent 3 years mourning the loss of her career, her status, her identity. She had seen her life as a story of a great fall. But in that small, quiet act of defending the dignity of a stranger, she finally understood. Her fall had not been an ending. It had been a violent, painful, and necessary beginning. It had stripped her of the things she thought mattered: privilege, authority, prestige. And in their place it had planted the seed of something far more valuable, a common humanity. Her world was infinitely smaller now, but for the first time in her life, her heart felt big enough to hold it. The story of Flight 88 serves as a powerful, real-world reminder that our assumptions can have devastating consequences. It shows that dignity isn't a privilege reserved for those who look a certain way or hold a certain title. It is a fundamental human right. Dr. Abasi wasn't looking for a fight, but he refused to surrender his dignity, and in doing so, he held a mirror up to a system that needed to change. The fallout wasn't magic. It was the direct, cascading result of one person's prejudice colliding with another person's unshakable principles. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with others. Stories like these are important. They spark conversations about respect, accountability, and justice. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We are dedicated to bringing you more compelling stories that explore the moments when ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances. Thank you for listening.